Hey everybody, Tom here, and today I want to talk about tips for teaching the game Dinosaur Island. Now, Dinosaur Island is a game with really good curb appeal. It's a game that I think could get a lot of people excited about board games, or if they already know about board games, just because it has a really fun theme and a cool aesthetic look to it. And so people may want to get this to the table. This video is about giving you tips for how to make teaching this game a little more smooth so that hopefully people who are excited about the game stay excited about the game. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. We're going to start with tip number one. Tip number one is about having the appropriate audience. So who is this game for? To make sure that you're not playing it with the wrong group, you want to make sure that you are starting off, first of all, with people who like medium to heavy games. This game is not a light game. This is not for beginners. You do not want to bring this game out to teach people about the board gaming hobby. You want to bring this out with seasoned players who will be able to handle a lot of different phases and a couple of interesting win conditions and things like that. So I'm calling this game good for people who like medium to heavy games, somewhere in that range, medium heavy games. Of course, you're going to want to bring people in who really like Jurassic Park. If they are like me and grew up with Jurassic Park and just absolutely love it, this game could really appeal to them. That would be a good audience member for this game. Or where maybe they're humdrum about Jurassic Park, but they like worker placement games. If you're finding that you have some friends who really like the worker placement mechanic, this is a really good game for them because this is essentially worker placement game cubed. Like there's like 3 sets of worker placement going on here. So that would be a great audience member for this game. Tip number 2 is going to come with setting up the game. I think it's important to involve your players when it comes to setting up any game because there's a lot of learning that can happen when it comes to setting up a game. And so in this game, there are 2 specific places that I think are great to have players setting up. The first is to make sure that everybody has a hand in setting up the market board. That's where it's going to take the most amount of work. And having your players, assigning your player a stack of things and say, hey, shuffle these, or hey, pull out these certain player count tiles and then shuffle them and they go over here and then let's lay them out. Having your players as an active part of setting up the market board is going to be really important. The other boards don't take a lot of setup, and so the market board is kind of where you want to focus your attention as you're getting ready for the game. The other thing is every player board takes a lot of setup. And so once you have the main play area set up, you've got all those boards in the middle set up, that's when you have everybody lay their boards out in the exact same way. Whether you put your boards, oh, I have some here somewhere. Whether you put your boards, on the left and the right or the right and the left, it doesn't matter as long as you're all doing kind of the same thing. And so that's my other recommendation is make sure that you're all setting up your own player areas together. So if each person has a little bag with all of their individual components, everybody dumps those out at the same time. They all fish for the same pieces and put them in the same place together. So that's my other setup tip for Dinosaur Island. Now, let's get into tip number 3. How do you actually explain the rules of the game? Now, if you've seen my teaching tip videos before, this is not going to be a surprise, my recommendation here. But my recommendation is you always start with the end winning condition. So in this case, victory points. You're going to then step back one step at a time. How do you get points? How do you get points? You're going to go backwards until the beginning of the game, and then you're going to wrap again forward. So let's get specific with this game because this game has some pretty confusing scoring in my opinion. There's a lot of layers to it. So if I have everybody at the table, all the pieces are set up, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to, sorry, I'm covering my face. So that's probably not a good thing. Okay, so you're going to show the victory point board, and you really need to establish, first of all, the way you win the game is by having the most victory points. And in order to get victory points are going to happen. You're going to get some victory points between rounds, but you're also going to get a lot of victory points at the end. So the thing that I established is that the star symbol is for victory points. Okay, so that's the first thing. Talk about stars are victory points. The other thing that's going to be really important is to say, You know, one really good way to get victory points from one round to the next is going to be to raise your excitement level. So that's what this tracker here is here, and the star is going to be the excitement level. So, you know, kind of summarizing, we're all trying to get points, and one good way to get points is by raising your excitement level. So I would just establish that. The next thing that I would do is I would go backwards through the phases. So in order to get points, the way that you're going to get points is by building a park. And so you come over here to phase 4. So we're going to be building a park, and you're going to be having dinosaurs and different attractions in your park. And you're going to notice that on your board you're going to see some stars. Some stars are really dark and some are really light. These light stars are going to be round-to-round scoring opportunities. Sorry, I'm kind of looking at the camera to make sure you can see that stuff. But these dark stars are going to be end-of-game scoring opportunities. And so I would pause and just talk about this board and be like, okay, so for example, at the end of the game, you're going to get 1 victory point for every one of these dinosaurs here. And then maybe I would grab a different dinosaur and say, look, these other dinosaurs are worth 2 victory points for every dinosaur you end up at the end of the game. And they're also going to provide you points from round to round. And hey, look, there's our excitement tracker. Our excitement tracker, if you have more of these dinosaurs, that's going to get you more excitement. And so, again, just to recap, I'm going from victory points and excitement to the way you get those victory points and excitement is by building a park with a whole bunch of dinosaurs. And then we're going to go to the phase 3 board. The way you get dinosaurs is you need to fulfill these different recipes. Every dinosaur needs some DNA, just like in the movie Jurassic Park. So we've got to make sure we have the right DNA. And so on your board, you're going to have all these different DNA cubes. And the way you're going to get dinosaurs is you're going to pay these DNA cubes to build new dinosaurs. Okay, you may want to just take a quick second and talk about, you know, obviously the more dinosaurs we have in the park, the more dangerous it's going to be. So also throughout this game, we're going to have to raise our security levels. But I would just keep it very brief when talking about this board. This board is pretty overwhelming. So I go from victory points to build your park really cool. The way you get dinosaurs in your park is you're going to be spending these DNA, make sure that we keep our park safe, stuff like that. And then I would do a brief overview of the phase 2 board. So the way that we're going to get the DNA and the way we're going to help build our park is we need to upgrade it. And over here we have a market with a whole bunch of different upgrading options. So that's going to be our phase 2 board. It's just to say, this is just going to be a way that's going to make your park different than other people's parks. And then we go to the phase 1. So over here, this is going to be how we get DNA and also how you get recipes for different dinosaurs so that you can spend the DNA there. And so I would just do a really quick, you know, 3 to 5 minute overview going backwards through the phases just so they have an idea that this is Jurassic Park, the board game, because the theme will really help with this. So once you go backwards, then you may want to, I wish I had done this better in my gameplay video, you may want to just do a quick forwards overview, just to recap. So in phase 1 of the game is where you're going to be getting DNA and maybe getting some dinosaur recipes. Phase 2 of the, oh, I wish I had this ready better. Phase 2 of the game is where you're going to be upgrading your park so that your park is different than my park. Phase 3 of the game is where you're going to be spending your DNA to get more dinosaurs and trying to make sure that your park is safe. And then, because you haven't mentioned this yet, phase 4 of the game is where we're going to let the visitors into the park and they're going to score you some points and bring in some money as well. And so that's how we're going to play Dinosaur Island. You just give a very brief overview. Then, once you've gone backwards and forwards, brief overview, 5 minutes max, then I would say, if it was me teaching a group of people, I would say, okay, now this game has a lot of different phases, as you can already tell. So what we're going to do is we're going to play one full round of a short game. You can mention that or not. We're going to play one full round, and then I'm going to let you guys decide if we want to reset the game and try again, or if we'll just keep going forward from there. So you just give everybody an out. You say, listen, this first round, I'm not going to tell you everything at the beginning. We're going to learn one phase at a time. And then at the end of that round, if you want to keep going with the park you've started, awesome. We're going to do that. Otherwise, we're just going to keep going and we'll do a short game. So get detailed on your phases while you're actually playing, because every phase is basically its own little mini game. So you're just going to take it one phase at a time. And that's going to be a really easy segue into tip number 4, which is always about rules to wait on. So you're going to kind of see that we're going to do an overview, and almost every single rule is something that you're going to be waiting on. And so you're going to do the specific rules. If it was me, I would do the specific rules for each phase at the beginning of each phase, because they are all so different. Okay, so especially visitors. You may briefly mention visitors coming into the park in your overview, but that visitors thing is pretty complicated, and talking about patrons and hooligans and stuff like that, like I would definitely hold off on any details about visitors until phase 4. When you're talking about phase 4, when you're actually executing phase 4, that's when I would bring things in like that. Similarly, my other tip is objective cards. The objectives are easy. Like, you could talk about the objectives in your overview and say, hey, here are some great ways to get points. But actually mentioning the details of the objective cards, like if you get this objective, then everyone else has until the end of the round. Like that, I think for me is a little bit weird. So I would save explaining the mechanics of the objective cards until the end of round 1 if somebody's getting close to an objective, or maybe if they're not that close to an objective, the end of round 2. So as I was playing the game, you may have noticed that it was, for me, I was like, oh, at the end of round 1, I knew I was going to get one of those objectives soon. So I paused and I hurried and talked about that objective, or the way that objectives worked. And I just kind of did it vaguely. But yeah, just be aware that the objective card rules are a little bit funky. Tip number 5 is our miscellaneous tips, and there is quite a list. Usually I only have 1 or 2, but this one has a bunch. So let's dive in. First recommendation I have is that you want to do a short game for the first game. So as I mentioned, you're going to do a quick round, but a short game does not take very long. I think my video clocked in a little over an hour, and that was me playing 2 players, so it could be longer with more players for sure. But start with the first game, or start with a short game first. Maybe just do 1 round and then reset, as I had mentioned before. But yeah, for sure, I think the short game is really only good for teaching the game. After that, I would always do a medium or a long game. But for teaching game, use the short game. And I would play, if it was me, I would try to make sure, if I was pulling out Dinosaur Island, because setup takes so long, that you are playing in a time where you have enough time to do 2 full games. Maybe a short game and a medium game. So if you only have an hour, maybe an hour and a half, I wouldn't pull out Dinosaur Island. I would make sure that I had 2 to 3 hours or something like that before I were to play Dinosaur Island. That way you can do your practice game, and then you could do like the legit game, because there are so many steps. We already mentioned having the option of resetting after round 1. I would just be upfront about that at the beginning. And then at the end of round 1, just feel it out. How is everybody doing? Is there somebody way ahead or way behind to where it makes sense to reset? I've been known to, if somebody's way behind at the end of the round, at no fault of their own because they're learning the game, sometimes I'll just bump their marker to be 1 point behind the next lowest player or something like that. So just keeping your options open after the first round of maybe resetting or continuing forward. Other than that, I would say that when you introduce the game, especially if you're playing with people who like worker placement, for me, the simplest thing to do is to say that this game is basically like 3 worker placement games in one, and they're all slightly different worker placement games. We have the worker placement of the scientists in phase 1, and I know it's not technically a worker placement, but for a tip coming up, you may use cubes, but there is kind of a worker placement acquisition thing happening with the market phase. And then I know it's not technically worker placement at the phase 3 when you're on your own board, but it is pretty worker placement-y. It's just that other people can't take your spot. So just kind of introducing, hey, we're going to be doing 3 mini worker placement games, all of these things feeding one into the other until we get our dinosaur park. Could be a good way to approach explaining this game. Now, my general tip for people is if you're playing a complicated game, for you to go first so you could lead the way. I'm actually going to swap that with this game. I think that the best idea is for you to go last in this game. The reason why I say that is, especially for phase 1 and phase 2, where it's drafting, most people may feel like you, who know how to play the game, would draft the best stuff. And why wouldn't you? That's kind of the point. And so by you putting yourself last on this drafting kind of an idea, I think that's going to put people's guards down a little bit so that you can give good advice to the first couple of players, and then you're going to be left with whatever's left over at the end of those phases. And so it might hurt your game a little bit, but I think that at the end it kind of creates a positive vibe where you are offering up good opinions on how to help people, and you're offering good suggestions on the smartest things to draft. If you've watched my gameplay video, my next tip is maybe consider finding some cubes for the market phase. This didn't happen so much when I was playing with other people, definitely while I was playing alone, but I do think that it's easy for people to forget to pay, and I think it's easy for people to forget if they have done one or two purchases. And so just by having something there, you're contributing to the worker placement idea that I'm going to put my worker here to acquire this thing. And I just think that it's a really easy way to backtrack whose turn it is and things like that. It's just kind of a tricky thing where everybody gets two actions and you're going around the table. For me, it's something that slips my mind sometimes. And along those lines, I wish I had done this in my video, but I just didn't. If it was me, I would put a whole bunch of 2 coin stacks somewhere on that phase 2 board or underneath, like at the bottom part of the phase 2 board, so that grabbing 2 coins is a very viable option. It like looks viable. You could say, look, you don't have to buy any of these things. You could just grab one of these stacks of 2 coins. So that's something that I probably should have done in my video. I just didn't think about it. But especially in that first game, making sure that people understand that that is an option. It's easy to slip their minds, I think. And then we're almost at the end here. Passing in this game is unique, in my opinion. So when you pass in most games, like if you're going to pass as things are going around, that usually means you are done, you are out. That's not quite how it works in this game. On phase 1, if you pass, then you're taking your worker or your scientist and making it a worker, but you still might have other scientists and you're still in that round. Same thing with the market phase. You may choose to take the 2 coins, but that doesn't mean you have to give up your other purchase option. You still get the chance to do something else on the next turn. So yeah, I would just say that make sure you emphasize that passing in these particular phases is unique from other games that they probably have played. It doesn't pull them out of the phase or out of the round. They're still going to be in it. So just acknowledge that that could be weird. And then my last tip is probably a pretty obvious one. I think that you maybe could teach where everybody's doing phases 3 and 4 simultaneously. Definitely that's something that speeds up the game, is for everybody to be doing those phases at the same time. But during the first game, so that short game, I would not do that because there are just so many ways to make a mistake. There's a lot to track and a lot to do. So I would just continue to do phases 3 and 4. So that's the, this phase right here where you're moving your workers onto all those spots. And then the visitors phase where the people are coming in the line. I would make sure to do that in turn order so that people are getting the repetition of, okay, this is how this is going to go. And then you can also just explain to them that normally we would do this all together, and in our next game we will do it all at the same time. But for this game, let's make sure we go one bit at a time. And that's it. Those are my teaching tips. I'm sorry, I realized I was probably speaking too quickly there at the beginning. I was kind of just excited because I really like this game. I hope that this video is helpful and maybe you picked 1 or 2 things up that will help you next time you need to teach Dinosaur Island. It's a very cool game that I think will excite a lot of people, but with all of those phases and all of those different kinds of worker placement type things, I think it could get a little overwhelming, and I do think that it could be poorly taught. But hopefully you have some ideas on how to teach this game now. If you have any other ideas that I haven't thought of, or maybe you taught something in a certain way, leave me a comment at the bottom. Whoa, that was weird. I'm not even going to edit it out. Leave me a comment at the bottom, and I would love to hear what kinds of things that you guys come up with when you teach Dinosaur Island. Thank you for watching, and I will see you later. Bye!